Hey there, Python pioneers, and welcome to another video. Uh, just brief side note, I want to apologize for the chair phasing in and out like it does. Nothing I can really do about it. So hopefully that doesn't bother you too much. In this video, we're going to dive in and look at while loops. So in the last videos, we talked about conditional logic. We talked about conditional operators like and, or, not. We talked about relational operators like greater than or equal to, equals equals for equality, does not equals. We talked about Boolean values like true and false. And we also talked about if statements where you can check a condition, and if it is true, we execute a block of code. But what if we want to execute a block of code over and over until our condition is no longer true? This is where loops come in. And a loop allows you to run code over and over for either a set number of times or until a condition is no longer true. And the first one we're going to learn about is the while loop. The while loop allows you to run your block of code until the condition is no longer true. So let's dive in and look at a diagram from Automate the Boring Stuff. It's a nice diagram that kind of shows you what that flow looks like. So we have a start, and on the start, it drops down and checks the condition. We're going to see what this looks like in code here very soon. So let's say we're checking our condition and we say while our name does not equal your name, the string your name, we want to execute a block of code. So for while loops, we call that block of code the clause. You don't really have to remember that. It's more of just a technical term for the block of code. But all you really have to know is that the block of code underneath a while condition is the block of code that will run if the while condition is true. So let's say that I provide the variable name, I set it to Jason, right? So Jason does not equal the string your name. So that condition is true. In this case, what does it do? It prints out, follow the line. It prints out, please type your name. And then it takes the name as input, so it uses the input function, prompts the user. There's no prompt provided, so we'll just see print, please type your name. And then it'll be a blinking cursor waiting for the user to type something. And when they type it, it will be put in the variable name. Then it goes back, follow the line, it goes back and checks the condition again. So whatever value we set for name is now different, preferably. If you typed Jason again, well, we already know what will happen. Jason does not equal your name, so the condition is still true. It goes back and prints again, please type your name, and then takes the input from the user, stores it in the name variable, goes back, checks the condition again. As long as the name variable is not set to the string your name, this loop will run forever. So let's say eventually we type in, we get the joke and we type your name, and that's stored in the name variable. When it gets up here to the condition, it's going to check it, and it's your name does not equal your name is false. So it breaks out of the while loop. The clause does not run again. The block of code underneath the while loop does not run again. And it prints thank you. And the loop is over. So let's jump into Mu and let's take a look at what that code looks like. Let me get zoomed in here. Okay, so let's type out, right? We had a variable called name, and we'll just set that to an empty string to start, okay? Now this is an important part. Before we use the variable name in a while condition, we have to define it. So we've defined our variable name. Now we're going to type out while, and just, it operates in the same way that the if statement did. You have your keyword, now you have your condition, and then a colon. Okay, so our condition was while name does not equal your name. Now we type our colon out, just like with the if statement. It indents for us, so we're on an indented block now. We're in our while clause. Now we want to type out something. So we're going to print, or I said type, but we want to show the user something. So we're going to print, please type your name, period, right? And now this is an important part, this next line of code, right? We need to take in input from the user and change the value of name. If we don't, this loop will never stop running. And as a matter of fact, it will just continually print, please type your name. I'm going to try to run this now just to show you, and we'll see what it does. Uh-oh. I think I broke Python. Okay, we see it flashing down here like crazy. So I'm going to stop it. Okay, so what it was doing was literally printing, please type your name as fast as it possibly could, over and over and over. And that's because at the end of the while loop, it goes back, right, and checks the condition again. Well, name is definitely not set to your name, it's set to nothing. It's an empty string. So it will just keep running until the end of time. Or your computer crashes, one or the other. Okay, so what we want to do is say name equals, and we're going to take input from the user. Okay, that'll slow things down for us and give the user a chance to break out of this while loop. Okay, and the last thing they did, just so we know when we've broken out of the loop, we come out, we get back to the first line here, so we're not indented anymore, and we print goodbye. I don't know if that's what they printed, but that's what we're going to print. Now, if I did it like this, what would that do? Right, that would print goodbye every time the while loop iterates. We call it iterating. It's just like every time it runs. So you can have spaces like this. As a matter of fact, I could come all the way down here and that would be fine. It's all about indentation. So you can have as many new lines like this as you want, as long as this block of code is indented after the while loop. It's part of the while clause. So let's just bring this back up here, bring it back to the first line, and let's run this. So it says, please type your name. And let's say I haven't got it yet, and I type, oh, my name's Jason. Please type your name. Jason. Jason. It just keeps prompting over and over, right? You're like, what do you want from me? Please type your name. So if you type your name, it breaks out of the while loop, it prints goodbye, and the program's over. So as long as the condition for the while loop is true, it will drop down, run that next line of code in the while clause, and just keep running the code until it gets to the very end. Now on this line right now, line 7 is the last line that's indented for the while loop. So when it gets to this point, it's going to keep reading really actually till line 10. And then on line 10, it's going to see that we're no longer in the while loop. So that line that tells it like, okay, the while loop's over. And I'm not going to execute line 10 yet. Let me go back and check, is this still true? Check the condition for the while loop. It always checks the condition first and then runs the code. So if I set my name to Jason, or actually your name by default, watch what happens. It just prints goodbye, because when it checked the condition, it was already false. Since it was false to begin with, it doesn't even run the while clause. And then also one more thing just to point out in case you were wondering, if I come down here and type out like, name equals empty string or something, this will not work. As a matter of fact, if you run this, it gives you an error, unexpected indent. So if you were thinking like, what if I indent after print? Will that be like associated with this while loop because it's indented up here? It will not be associated. As soon as you get, you break out of the indent and you come back and start writing more code, it will, it knows that that's the end of the while loop. So, but just to also show you, you can have as many new lines as you want, and this will work just fine. Oh, let me change your name. So it starts empty, right? It said goodbye because your name was already, the condition was already false. So let's say we run this. It says, please type your name. If I type Jason, it just keeps asking. And then I could type your name and it's over. So we can have as many new lines between each line of code in the clause, and that's not a problem at all. Okay, so another thing you can do with while loops, we have a condition, right? But what does that condition evaluate to? It evaluates to a Boolean value, right? So we could just type out true. Now we have a while loop that will never stop running. So no matter what, if I run this and I say my name's Jason, it's going to say, please type your name. If I say your name, it just keeps going. It never stops, right? So how would we break out of this? Sometimes this is useful. Maybe you don't want to break out, you don't want to check a condition to start your while loop. You want to check something once the while loop is running. And once something becomes true or a value is set inside of the while loop, then you're like, hey, I want to get out of here. I don't want to run the while loop anymore, right? So a way you can do that is called, it's a break statement is what it is. So I could put, just after this name equals input, I can put break. Now this while loop will only run one time. So, oh, let me run that. Please type your name. I type Jason. Loop's over. Not particularly useful in this case, right? But let me show you an example from Automate the Boring Stuff that I think is a pretty cool example. By the way, the example we're going to talk about shows taking a username and then like pretending like if it's not the right username, then we're going to break out and then taking their password. This is not how you would actually implement authentication, just for your awareness. It's much more complicated than that, but I think it shows a good example and kind of, I think it's easy to wrap your head around. So let's say instead of name, we have user name. And we'll say, while true, please type your username. And we'll say username equals input. And then, okay, so now what we can do is we can say if username does not equal Jason, break. Oh, and look, we need that extra colon. But actually, that's a good thing to show. So when I press enter here, it takes me to the same line the if statement started on. That's because I didn't put the colon. So if I put a colon, right, every condition every conditional statement that you're trying to write, you need that colon at the end. The colon tells Python, okay, what follows is a block of code, a new block of code that should only execute if this condition is true, right? So now when I type enter, it automatically indented for me. And I'll say if the username is not JSON, then let's break. So we don't even continue on in our while loop, right? We just break out. It's like pretend like in this while loop, we're going to have a program. So once you get past all these initial checks, you'll be inside of the database or something, right? So the next thing we'll check. So if we get down to like line 9 and 10 within this while clause, right? Because I'm back on the if line indentation. So I'm indented once. So, and I have to make sure that I don't start typing here. I have to type exactly on the same indentation. You know, I can't be 5 spaces in. I have to be 4, just like the if and the print and username here. So now let's say if I get to line 9 in this while loop, I know that the username must equal JSON, right? Because otherwise the program would break. It breaks out of the while loop. It doesn't break the program. It just breaks out of the while loop and then continues running. Whatever code is after the while loop. So let's say username is set to JSON, so it doesn't break. Now we'll say, actually we're going to create a variable called password, and we're going to say input, and we're going to provide a prompt. And we're going to say enter your password. Okay? And then if we say if password does not equal swordfish colon, let's add a new line between where this if statement starts and the next one, just so it's a little easier to read. And if we come in here and we say if password does not equal swordfish, then break. So they entered the wrong password. We'll say our password is swordfish. Okay? And then if we get to line 15 here, then we know that they entered the username JSON and the password swordfish. We'll print out access granted. Okay? Let me zoom out so you can kind of see what this all looks like together. So we have a while loop that's always true, so it's going to run forever. Then we print, please type your username. And actually, username's right there. We take the username as an input, so the user is going to be prompted to type text, and we're going to take that and store it in username. If the username is not JSON, does not equal JSON, break out of the while loop. Don't run anything else in this while clause. So let's say username is set to JSON. It's going to go to line 10. It's going to prompt the user with enter your password using the input function. The value that the user provides will be stored in the password variable. Then on line 12, we check if the password variable is not swordfish. So if they provide like any other string of text, it won't be equal to swordfish. We're going to break out of the while clause. Don't do anything else in the clause. But let's say they do provide swordfish, then we're going to come down and print access granted. So let's run this just so you can see what it looks like. So if I say my name is Bob, it says please type your name. Let me zoom in again so you can kind of see the prompt a little better. If I type Bob and press enter, it just says goodbye. If I run the program again, since we broke out of the while loop, the program ended. If I say please type your username and I type in JSON, it says enter your password. So username was set to JSON. When this input function prompted me, I typed in JSON. That was stored in the username variable. It checked if username, the value stored in the username variable is set to JSON. And all it does, right, with variables is it goes and gets the value that's stored there. So it would be exactly what I typed in. So it would look like that to the computer. It would be like if Jason does not equal Jason, which we know is false. So since it's false, right, the if condition doesn't run its block of code. So we don't break out of the while loop. So we come down, it prompts me using the input function for my password, and that's where we are. So it says enter your password. I haven't typed anything yet. If I type in anything except swordfish, then it's going to break, right? Because when it gets down here and it checks the value in the password variable, if it's not swordfish, then it's going to be true. So if I type in my password is monkeys, monkeys does not equal swordfish. The strings are not exactly the same, right? So that is true, then this line of code would break. So let's type in swordfish so we don't break there. And it says access granted. Now, interesting. It says please type your username. Well, what happened? We should have access granted, right? So this is what we would call a semantic error. So it's not immediately clear what's wrong. Python doesn't see anything wrong, but it's an error in our logic. So what we did is we printed access granted at the end of our while loop. But we already know that this while loop is always true, right? So if we ever want to get out of this while loop, we have to break at some point. If it never hits a break, it's just going to run through over and over and over and over until it sees a break. So what we would need to do to fix this semantic error is add a break here as well. This way, even if we enter the password right and everything, it'll print access granted, and the last thing it'll do is break out of the while loop. So if we run that, and I type my name as Jason, I type swordfish as my password, it says access granted, goodbye. So we actually were able to break out of the while loop there. Okay, so that's a little bit about while loops. And in the next lesson, we're going to take a look at for loops.